Okay, the H1B guy here, and today, the H1B guy live, Stamp It Out 3, a Q&A discussion on immigration, H1Bs, S3599, S386, and more. And tonight, I'm joined by my very special guest, Wolf_Dog, who can be found on Twitter at @dark_night 1587. But before we get started, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't already, to please subscribe to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube. It helps me to produce more content like this for you. I also wanted to mention that the H1B Guy offers a variety of consulting services. If I can help you with your case management, please reach out. I'd love to hear how. I also wanted to mention that if you have any questions tonight for myself, or for Wolf Dog, please leave those in the chat. I'll ask for them over the course of the conversation, and we'll get to them at the very end. So please don't be shy. Put those comments, questions, anything that you'd like for us to cover, and we'll get to that at the very end. So as we have done on our previous Stamp It Outs, we're going to do sort of a rapid fire conversational question back and forth here. And we'll take a couple of breaks kind of through the course of the conversation. But I'm going to kick it off tonight, and I want to introduce my very special guest here. And, Wolf Dog, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. So glad to have you tonight. But I just want to start off and have you tell me, your story. Where are you from? Why did you come to the U.S.?
Robert, I appreciate you inviting me to, a live session that you have been doing lately. I'm not going to hide anything. My name is Himanshu. I'm a native to India. And I got my bachelor's in physical therapy in India itself back in 2010. And within a few months, I was already in the United States. Now, since you asked, why did I come to the US? The United States has been very short. Healthcare professionals, it could be physicians, it could be nurses, it could be physical therapists. And being one of those, I thought that, I should come here, pursue my passion of helping people. And, that would also give me the opportunity to provide my family a better life. So within months of coming to the US in 2010, early in 2012, I already had my license to practice, my national boards, got my license to practice, and in 2012, I started working.
Yeah, I think you said you came and went to Texas A&M. Is that right?
Yes, Texas A&M in College Station.
Okay. And it was a master's in physical therapy?
I got a master's in kinesiology with a major in exercise physiology.
Okay. What was your GPA? Do you remember the master's program? Just curious. Any idea?
If I remember, it was either 3.85 or 3.87.
Yeah. And you did that in what, 2 years?
I'm less than 2 years technically, because it's 4 semesters worth. Mm-hmm. So it's 2 years or not 2 years, if you want to be very technical about it.
Mm-hmm. If you could go back, what would be one piece of advice that you would give yourself before you stepped on the plane to come to the U.S.?
Robert, this sounds very bad, but honestly, my piece of advice to myself would have been, don't come here. This sounds very bad, but it is what it is. The thing is, I would have really moved to Canada, Australia, or a European nation. And the reason is, those nations, they value the skills of an immigrant and they welcome them with open arms. Back then, I did not know what kind of a quagmire I'm getting myself into. And if I moved back then, I would have been another nation's citizen by now. It sounds sad, but I would have never put myself in this bureaucratic spiral. It's just, something that I cannot put words to. Reason being, not a lot of people experience this, who are US citizens or permanent residents, or, people coming from other nations, they do not experience this. So it's hard for people to understand. But this would have been my advice to myself. Don't come here.
Yeah, and I think, we've seen that a lot lately too. on social media, folks that are here advising, recent graduates or folks that are considering, master's programs here in the U.S. to not. And I think the trend has shown that too, right? If you look at the number of students that have been coming into the U.S. over the last 4 years, that number's trended down significantly. And, I'm not surprised to hear you say that, right? Because if you think about what you said, if you would have done the merit-based system in Canada or Australia, New Zealand, right? Those are kind of the top three that we've talked about a good bit on this channel. But I believe a lot of those, it's 4 or 5 years as a permanent resident before you have path to citizenship. I could be wrong in those numbers exactly, but I want to say that they're about 4 or 5 years. If once you've been a permanent resident 4 or 5 years. The other thing is that it's immediate universal health care for permanent residents of those countries. And that's a big thing, that a lot of folks are that look for, right? When you're looking at migration, global migration, that's, one of the things I think that becomes a factor, right?
In some of the cases it does, but then, it has its downfalls too. But at the end, if I was to consider anything, let me just give you an idea about, how much of a money train this is.
Yeah.
You might not, you probably know of it already, but in these 10 years that I've been here, between myself, my employers, we have already spent over $20,000,
right?
And there's no end in sight to this whole backlog.
Right.
We've already spent over $20,000. Now compare that to, I'll give you an example of Japan. Your permanent resident application does not even cost $800. $800, and you're a permanent resident there. Consider Australia, a family of 4. The application fee from the starting to the end is about $7,000. And in $20,000, what have I gotten here? I'm still considered temporary. We are called cheap labor. That's a whole another thing to talk about. But what have I gotten out of it? Nothing. To be honest with you, we still, when we go back home and we have to come to the US again, there's such a fear on our head that maybe these guys will not let us in over some vague reason that I cannot verify your employment when technically we have been working there for the last 10 years. Yeah. It's just it's vague reasons that we fear on this. And again, like I said, shouldn't have ever come. Yeah. If I was to go back. Robert, since you have experience in employment-based immigration, I would really like to ask you, what all have you done in employment-based immigration, and why are you really advocating for immigration reform?
No, I think that's a great question, right? We have to talk about my credentials and why, my opinion is one that's credible. I started recruiting in the early 2000s, specifically network engineers, system engineers, and then from there evolved in kind of to a full desk, very technical recruiter. But I learned very quickly that there were a lot of roles that were not going to be filled with, a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, right? These were very much high-tech roles that were dominated by H1Bs, particularly the corp-to-core third-party business that I've talked about a good bit. So what I realized is that I needed to build relationships with these third-party companies that had the access to the pipelines. And through that, I just became very interested in employment-based preferences and really how complicated the entire system is. And I've really enjoyed solving problems, and I can tell you that there's nothing more complicated than someone who's transferring their H-1B visa and the documents that are involved in the data collection in that. Right? Kind of the validation of the requirements that goes into that. And so kind of over the course of my career as a recruiter, just became more and more and more knowledgeable. I had an opportunity to really create an immigration program from scratch for a staffing firm. And through that, worked on H1Bs, E3s, the Australian version of the H1B, TNs, Canada, Mexico, and pretty much any kind of EAD, out there, right? While it was a W-2 for the most part, the EAD for staffing recruiters is probably the most complicated work status to understand, and what the restrictions sort of around that, because H's are H's, right? They're either on your W-2 working for you, or they're working for a third party corp to corp. But when we get into the EADs and the complication around that, so I just really realized that there was this gap at my employer, gap that's out there, right? That there are recruiters constantly all day making phone calls and shooting off emails, but they don't really understand what the work authorization is for the individual that they're talking about. They just say, oh, you can work on my W-2? Got it. And then they move on, right? They're not confirming card in hand, validity dates, any of that. And so what I realized is that, wow, there is this exposure out there for companies that really don't fully understand true non-immigrant employment-based visas. And so to answer the second part of your question, why did I get into talking about this and being an advocate for it? Well, I just think over my years of experience, I've realized that our current system is archaic. It's based on legislation from 1990. And when you look at kind of what that means and how our society has evolved and how global migration has evolved, I will tell you that I think that, we are at a very much a breaking point here in our society. And what that breaking point is we are in a human capital war. And if we don't realize that right now, I can tell you that I've worked with offshore teams and nearshore teams in Canada, Mexico, Philippines, India, and I can tell you that they do it for cheaper and they do it for almost as good a quality. And so that to me is where I realize that is the bigger elephant in the room. And that if we restrict immigration to the U.S., specifically high tech, high skilled, whether that is technology or in your case, medical professionals, we're going to lose, and we're going to lose now. We're going to lose more in the future. And so that's kind of how the platform evolved, was that I realized one of the things that I do very well is that I understand both sides, or I try to anyway, and I want to bridge the gap. But I also bridge the gap on the side of reform for the benefit of everyone, right? The benefit of you, the immigrant, the benefit of our society, and honestly, the benefit of the employers, because the employers are the ones who have control. They really do. At the end of the day, you talk about your employer spending thousands of dollars on your behalf. There are employers out there every day that make the decision not to do that. They'd rather not spend that money. And so I think that's just kind of how the evolution happened. That the system is archaic. It needs reform. And I hope if I keep talking about it, folks will listen.
One day we can hope.
Yeah.
Robert, since you said that, your primary focus was in the technology side of staffing, do you have any knowledge about immigration for healthcare professionals?
I will tell you that experience and the research that I've done has really been more recently. I can't say that I've ever processed a medical H1. I haven't, but that's because my experience has been in the staffing side. But what is interesting about that in your question is that the process to go through, H1B sponsorship for you is no different than a Java developer, right? Mm-hmm. The difference is just the specialty occupation, the job category, right? The requirements, And of course, the prevailing wages are going to be different because you're based more on a medical wage, right, than an IT wage. As we've seen historically, those wages for H1Bs and physician status generally tend to be higher. They just are. That data is out there. That's not something that is a secret by any means. And I will get to this later, but as I've done more research on H1Bs that work in the medical field, we have to begin to question what sense that makes for them to be under the H1B designation if 90% of H1s are in IT, right? Or whatever that number truly is. So I've learned a lot about it over the last few months, though. Definitely more as I've researched, S3599 and some of the newer language included in some of the newer proposals. So you've been very vocal on Twitter about the need for reform. What is it that you're fighting for?
The simplest answer to this is, Robert, this is a fight for justice. We are trying to fight the discrimination that's going on. All we are asking is that, treat us fairly for all our contributions to the economy and the society here. The first question that comes to my mind, or let me put it this way. I always ask for a logical explanation, behind us not even becoming permanent residents. After most of us, we have been here for more than a decade. And most of us, like I said, we are not even permanent residents, let alone, being citizens. And the issue here, that comes to my mind is that, anybody from, let's say, it's another nation, XYZ, somebody that is not even born in that nation, they will get their permanent resident status way before than we do. Most of us won't probably even see it if the immigration laws don't change. But I really don't understand what's the logic behind this.
Yeah, the country caps specifically.
Exactly, the country caps. I don't understand the logic behind it. Basically, I always gravitate to, immigration should be skilled. I don't understand the logic behind how somebody as skilled as a surgeon, the engineers that you hire, a physical therapist like me, multiple, colleagues that I have that have been here for over a decade. How come we are not even, technically, it's like we are not eligible for the American dream. Yet somebody from another nation that is not even born yet, they can come here, become permanent residents, and become citizens without a question. And yet, we have been here for so long, and we are still languishing in this never-ending backlog. So, what's the reason behind this ineligibility for the American dream? Honestly, no, I think it's straight up discrimination. Because, each one of us over the course of, let's say, average it out 10 years that we have been here, each one of us has paid hundreds of thousands into the economy in the form of income tax, in the form of property tax, in the form of all the purchases that we do, in our daily life.
Right.
Then why are we treated like second grade humans? Why are we still considered temporary workers here? Why are we still vetted every single time that we travel outside the US? It's just something, that just doesn't make sense to me. How it makes sense to the politicians, I would love to go on a debate with them. That's not going to happen because, politics, we have been historically used as political pawns.
Right.
That's the only thing that makes sense to me.
That's been very evident over the last week, right?
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on, this is a bit of a sidebar question. We're talking about country caps. What are your thoughts on caps around H1Bs? Is that something that you have an opinion on? Or I've seen a lot of discussions on that out there. I honestly don't really support that idea. I get it, but I don't know. What do you think about it?
Now, there's two facets to this issue. One is we are considering country caps, which only apply to the
Green card,
immigrant visa,
employment
right?
based.
But at the same time, you have H1Bs that do not have country
Right.
caps. So what happens is now you have H1Bs coming in nonstop without a country cap. So let's say 6 out of 10 H1Bs are Indians.
Yeah, I've seen the number somewhere between 60 to 70%.
Correct. It has been averaging about 65-66%. So let's say out of 10, every 10 people, it's 6 people that are Indians on H1B. But at the same time, if you're only giving 7% of immigrant visas to them, that's 0.7 people out of every 10 people that will get the immigrant visas, that will be Indians. So not even one whole person is getting a visa out of the 10 people if he or she is an Indian. And here we are flooding the market with 6 H1Bs. That ratio is skewed out of proportions.
Right.
It doesn't even make sense. Now, the only logic behind no country caps on H1B is that yes, the United States needs those workers. If we were to read the statistics, in the technology industry, it's only about 12% jobs that are being taken by H1Bs. So let's not even talk about how H1Bs are taking or displacing the United States workers. No, I mean 12% is nothing if you think about it. 12%
Right.
is nothing, and to hear about how we are displacing workers, American workers, it's more like like I said, it's more of a political ploy. But going back to the country caps on H1B, maybe to fix this issue, first thing that needs to happen is maybe introduce country caps, and let's see what happens. The one primary issue that will happen, one primary problem that will start is the technology firms, healthcare industry, that's going to suffer, and it's going to suffer bad, because now you have basically pulled the plug on the machine that's bringing in these workers that are actually helping the technology industry, that are helping the healthcare industry.
The pipeline,
Now
the human capital pipeline, right?
Exactly. So honestly, the best way about it, the best way to go about this whole situation is to remove country caps from the employment-based immigrant visas.
Yep.
You kill the H1B. You kill the H1B program. That's not going to solve the problem. It will actually make the tech industry, make the healthcare industry suffer a whole lot more than what people can imagine. It's easier said than done. As simple as that.
It is. I'll tell you though, it sure feels like the current administration over the last 3 months has tried to kill the H1B. I mean, based on the series of orders and the new, interim final rule that's come out, and we'll talk about that more. But it just, a lot of signs pointing to that. But I wanted to ask you. We've talked about physical therapy, masters in kinesiology, rehabilitation. But can you just tell me a little bit more about what it is that you do?
Robert, I'll give you a little history on this one, because been here 10 years, so there's a lot going on. After I graduated from Texas A&M, which was back in May of 2012, the end of May, like after a week of graduating there, I had already started working as a physical therapist in New York. Texas was still home. I wanted to come back to home, so I just made my mind that let me get my license endorsed to Texas, and I moved back to Texas in a few months. Came back to Texas, and then I worked. At that time, I was working with a staffing agency, and they did put me up with a few clients of theirs for temporary contracts. Then after that, luckily I was able to spend about 4 years with an organization that focuses on the workers' compensation industry. So, taking care of the injured employees from the time that they get injured and making sure that you help them get back to work, up to their fullest potential. Let's put it that way, because not all of them, all of them can't really do that based on what their injuries are like. But then, after about 4 years there, we had some issues with USCIS, with them asking for evidence basically on my immigrant visa petition, the I-140, if my employer could pay me. And for 4 years they had been paying me, so I had no idea, where that came from. The attorney tried to fight it, but they sent us an intent to deny. And at that time, it was like fight or flight for me. I had to find another job. So again, I would consider myself lucky that I found a very good employer. Currently, I work as the director of rehabilitation at a hospital here, and they have given me full control of the inpatient and outpatient side of it. And after about, I would say, after about 6 months of me being there, and doing what I was doing, they realized that I could possibly help them out even more. So now I've been given a free hand to develop their workers' compensation department in the hospital. Honestly, I enjoy what I'm doing, and not everybody gets the trust that I have been given by my employer, and I can't appreciate them enough. To be honest with you, like I said, I consider myself very lucky to be where I'm at. As far as my whole job situation goes, I'm happy and I enjoy what I do.
And you have the support of your employer. I mean, I think that's the key is you're given an opportunity to make an impact and a contribution, and overseeing physical therapy and rehabilitation for medical center. I mean, literally on a yearly basis, impacting thousands of lives. Right, and I think that's the key.
Robert, I'd like to ask you something. Do you have a good idea about the new wage rule, the final rule that has been introduced by the Department of Labor?
Yeah, so I have reviewed on the Federal Register. There is pages and pages and pages of what this rule is, but I think there were a handful of takeaways when it was announced, and when we really look through what it is, right? You look at the skill levels, the 1, 2, 3, 4s, and 28% increase in the median average, right? So you're talking about the percentiles, okay, moving up, the increase in the percentiles. And so really, I mean, the biggest thing around the wage increase is based on the location. And so, more rural America, right, which has its fair share of H1B physicians, the question becomes if that H1B is the only physician working in that area, how do they designate that salary, right? And are they comparing that individual then to, other counties, right? So when we get into the medical equation of wages, there's a lot of questions around that. I will tell you that companies, since this came out last week, are scrambling right now. They're scrambling to figure out, okay, what is this increase? What's the SIT code? What's the median average? What is the new wage? And that information is out there. You can find the data. You can submit it. But it really comes down to the job ID code and the MSA. The MSA meaning the geographic area to which the work site sits, the position sits. And so the best analogy that I can give is that, if you have someone that has a 105K salary right now, right? Let's say that that's the prevailing wage determination on the LCA, 105K salary. And if this is a perm employee, and let's say they're working in Dayton, Ohio, just going to throw out some random Midwest city, okay? 105K software engineer working in Dayton, Ohio. Well, a 28% increase to the average, the median average, right? So now you're looking at somebody who's been paying 105K now is what, 130?
Yep, 130 something.
Right? I mean, my math is fuzzy, so those of you who follow me, don't hold that against me. But I think employers have to begin to ask the question, okay, is that individual worth a 25 to 30K increase, right? And that is where the scrutiny and the tightening, and the restrictive nature of what's happening now is creating this impact. Just isn't going to be felt in staffing firms and in third-party consulting firms and in American consulting firms and even in the Indian integrators. It's felt in the startup and high-tech companies that have 1 to 2 or 3 H's that are on staff because they couldn't find a Pega developer or they needed a Hadoop expert, and this guy that they hired they sponsored his H. Now they are looking at saying, okay, gosh, we've been paying this guy, let's 140K. Now he's 175, right? And in times where revenues are down, right, companies are looking to cut costs. Good luck, right? And so the interesting thing about all this, and it comes down to what is it about? And we talked about this earlier. It's about the money, right? The 12-month renewals on third-party worksite H1s, that is constant revenue generation. But what you've talked about and you've alluded to earlier is the anxiety, the travel anxiety. Well, there's the renewal amendment extension anxiety too, right? That's a different anxiety altogether. And now, you're working for a third-party employer, and maybe you've worked for that employer 4 or 5 years. I know some guys that have been with the same employer 7, 8, 10 years because they've taken good care of them. But now it comes down to, even if they were paying that guy $75 an hour, right? Everything starts to be condensed. That margin shrinks. The third party worksite that guy's working on, they're not paying more rate. You can go back to them and ask them, but they're not hiking the rate. And so now everyone feels the squeeze, right? The third-party worksite says, no, I can't raise the rate. In fact, I was looking to reduce it by $5 an hour. The staffing firm or the MSP or the vendor in the middle of that says, I'm willing to shave $1 or $2 here or there to keep the guy on site, but it's not enough to meet the wage determination. And then at the end of the day, the third party, they can't afford to pay him plus the benefits and all of that. And it's unfortunate. Why can't they afford to pay him? Because they've got a staff of 30 or 40 other people that are in the same boat. And so the circle grows, right? And it grows because now there's more money involved, right? You're talking about the increasing of the wages, the increasing of the revenue generation for these third-party work sites specifically. But really, even the smaller employers now have to look and say, is this guy I have on staff or this girl that I have on staff, is she worth a 20 to 30, 25K increase when everyone else I have on my staff, I'm paying 110, 105? So what is that saying, right? It eliminates the cheap labor debate, but it also eliminates the employer's ability to compensate anyone at that level.
Exactly. I mean, if the H1 employee gets paid that much, then a permanent resident or a citizen employee is going to ask for the same money. Why would they leave that money on the table? It's simple, human tendency.
And
why would I?
They talk, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
It's not like they're not talking, right? I mean, H1s are talking to W2s because guess what? They've sat next to that guy for 2, 3 years in some cases. The
Mm-hmm.
person in the cube over to them while they're a U.S. citizen is their friend.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a personal relationship where, hey, oh yeah, I'm making 105. Oh, you're making 103, right? As much as employers don't want those conversations to happen, they happen. They don't happen all the time, but they happen. But I think now more than ever, when you look at this sort of wage hike increase going on, I would be willing to bet, and this is just a bet. It's a hunch. Um, I've been right recently on a lot of these hunches, but I'd be willing to bet that there are a lot of staffing firms out there that hold H1s right now that are
Mm-hmm.
looking to unload them because they're no longer profitable.
Mm-hmm.
The same can be said for the third parties out there too. Because guess what? You're only getting 75 an hour, but now you got to pay that guy 75 an hour or whatever those numbers look like. And when they're on your W2, you've got the payroll taxes and all of the burdens that go along with that. So it's not just a dollar to dollar number. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the next few weeks it'll be interesting to see how quickly this lawsuit occurs that's in the works and what that does. Does it stall this? Because they fast tracked this thing completely. There's no public notice around it. It is moving. And so again, it just has everyone scrambling.
That only makes sense because, I mean, like I said, 25 to 30% increase in wages, nobody, no employer will bite that, especially if you are a staffing firm. It's not going to happen.
Right.
It's not going to happen. And one thing is, yes, can you think about laying people off or terminating their employment? Yeah, you can, but then what about the need that your clients have?
Yeah.
What about the need all these tech industries have? What about the need that the healthcare industry have? So there's no solution to it, but you have to really you have to basically all that needs to be done is this rule needs to be done away with. There's no other way around it. I mean, who will hire somebody for 140K when they have people in the same position or in a similar position working for 105 or 110K? You are now basically looking at giving people an additional $30,000 a year across the board.
Across the board. In a
So the
time
company,
when employers are looking to reduce cost, decrease compensation, there have been employers that have imposed pay cuts 5-10% across the entire employee field. So I don't know. I mean, it's a very interesting dilemma. I think the narrowing of the specialty occupation and having the degree align with the job requirements. I mean, I think that for the most part, that's been going on. Maybe there was some, hey, we're willing to accept a bachelor's of computer science, engineering, electrical engineering or whatever. There were some, multiples to it, right? But now, I mean, the way I read the specialty occupation definitions is that the degree and the requirement are going to have to align identical to where there's no question, right? I mean, I get that one. The 1 year on the third party work site, I get that. They've been heading towards that for the last 4 years. No faster way to get USCIS out of a budget deficit than to increase the filing frequency and fees, right? But the wage one is the one that really is puzzling. And it's puzzling because it is impacting employers, not just the staffing firms and the third parties, but it is the employers who hold 1 or 2 or 3 H1s now that are going to have to make a very difficult decision. And I've got news for those folks. Those H's that are working as a perm employee for some of these startups or small businesses, are not displacing American workers. They're filling jobs that were probably unfilled for months on end before they decided that they'd sponsor an H.
That is correct. That is correct. Like I said, only 12% H1Bs taking up the tech jobs that are available. And that says a lot. We're not displacing people, especially, if you talk about healthcare professionals, there's no way we are actually displacing anybody.
Right.
It's just like I said, it's just another one of those things that is tossed out for political gains.
Well, I just wanted to ask anyone who is currently watching, if you haven't already, please hit that like button. Helps us with the YouTube algorithm for live streams. Just really appreciate anyone who's taken the time to join Himanshu and myself tonight. Himanshu, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the everyday challenges that you face as an H-1B immigrant, living and working here in the U.S. today?
Robert, this might just end up being the biggest rant on today's live show for your channel, because I don't know, where to start. I'll start with the basic of the basic things. Let's talk about driver's license. We only get our driver's license validity up to the expiration date on our H1B approvals. Now, where it gets funny is, let's say my H1B is expiring today and my driver's license also expires today. So my H1B extension was filed, let's say, a month ago. Technically, yes, I can go to the DPS, the driver's license office, and apply for an extension or renewal on my driver's license. Now what they do is, they will actually file a verification request with USCIS. And that verification request can take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, which most of the times, yes, it takes about 2 weeks at least. Now, it gets funny because when you open that verification inquiry, and if your driver's license already expires, you can't really drive to work. What are you going to do? Like take Uber or Lyft, or ask your friends to pick you up however long it takes for the USCIS to send back the verification to your driver's license office. And the other issue is, even with that verification coming in, that yes, there's an extension that has been requested on this particular person's H1B, the DPS is only allowed to extend your license up to 6 months. So now, again, you are going back to the driver license office.
Constant renewal.
Exactly. And, as healthcare professionals in our field particularly, some of these states, such as Indiana, their license to practice is also tied to your H1B expiration. And they have no such rule like, the DPS does, that we'll provide you with the 6-month extension until your actual extension happens.
You have to have the approval in hand. Is that?
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a lot of states. North Carolina's like that. I'm aware of a handful of states where you have to have the physical approval in hand.
Exactly. So now, with this license to practice physical therapy, it expired today, but my H1B extension was filed a month ago. But since my current H1B expired today, my license to practice also gets suspended today. Well, guess what? Now I don't have a license to practice, which technically it jeopardizes the H1B extension as well. So, like, does nobody really think of these things?
Yeah.
Like, all of these rules and laws are put into place without giving a thought to how everything ties together into this just one equation. And then, the other challenge, to be honest with you, we already talked about it, this, uncertainty. Every time we file for an extension, there's an uncertainty. The USCIS might feel funny and they will be like, "Hey guys, I need more evidence." Or like in my case, for my I-140, they issued an intent to deny, saying that my employer can't pay my wages. Well, I gave you my I gave you my tax returns, I gave you my pay stubs, they have been paying me, then why are you saying that they cannot pay me? So it's vague reasons like this that they might just deny your petitions for.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, this all of this happens after that very same agency, the USCIS, has vetted our education, our tax returns, our job repeatedly. 3 years they're doing that. So it's
Mm-hmm.
where do you find those reasons from? Or is it more like, you have officers who are just having a bad day and they want to take their frustration out on somebody? Well, let's do it to the H1B people, because the problem is, you know maintaining our status here is something that we'll do anything for, right? It's like,
Right.
hey, Indians will be desperate. They are in a green card backlog. They will be desperate. So let's do anything to them. They're still going to pay through their nose, which is where, this new USCIS fee increase also comes into play. I mean, who came up with this $2,500 premium processing fee? I mean, come on, guys, really? And then, going further, I already expressed my concerns on, when we travel internationally, coming back again, you have that same fear. The
Mm-hmm.
CBP agent might just tell you that I can't let you in. For what reason, you don't know. It's they'll pull you in for questioning, and all that drama happens again. For what? What's the reason? We have been here for a decade. Everything has been vetted multiple times. What's the reason? You never know. And as healthcare professionals, like I said, physicians, nurses, physical therapists, we are in such a shortage occupation that multiple facilities could actually use our help, right? I'm at one hospital right now. Another small hospital in another city that's probably near to my residence, they could probably use my help. But given the fact that we are on H1B, we are tied down to one employer now. So I might have a few hours free during the day, or I might be able to pull out 5-6 hours during the week that I could be able to help the other facility out. But no, I can't do that. And this is after the fact that there's no available workers to fill those positions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it's also hindering what we could really help the other facilities out with. We could help their patients out, but no, we cannot. You're just tied down to one employer. And the other issue that also, that I mean, it has happened to me as well. There's no hiding. Not everybody doesn't get the perfect job placement. Some people are not happy in their current placements, but do they have a choice? A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people don't. Like I said, I consider myself lucky that I found this employer and I was able to move, but a lot of people don't have that choice. So,
Mm-hmm.
I have known people who were racially abused at their employer, but they could not even complain about it due to the fear of retaliation, which could result in job loss,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll go out of status.
Mm-hmm.
And their families will have to basically leave the US, where they have been for the prime years of their life.
Yeah.
That's it's I could basically go on and on about this.
Well, what's interesting is I've talked about, an EAD with advanced parole, right? And what that would, at least that step in that direction, and what that would create, right, is freedom. Freedom of choice,
Hmm.
freedom of travel, right? And that freedom of choice is picking who your employer is and how much you're paid and what you're willing to do, right? Or what you're going to do, what your job responsibilities would be. And just how we Americans take that for granted, right? Just that we have that choice. And so, that's something that I've advocated for. Hopefully we'll see something like that. I've called it the H1B EAD. Um, whether or not that's the term used at some point or not, but I think at least we have to look at a step in that direction to at least begin clearing the backlog, or if we're not going to clear the backlog, then give advance parole rights. Reduce the anxiety, allow freedom of employer, freedom of job, and freedom of compensation, and freedom of travel.
Robert, the funny thing is, if you look at these statistics, which are actually, it's all over the place. You just need to look. The Indian population in the US is pretty much the most well-educated and financially well-off population.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we are the ones who are called every name under the sun. We get cheap labor. And recently you might have seen on Twitter that, there were people calling us sewage dwellers. I mean,
yeah. Oh, I've seen the memes. I was part of it about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, actually, where, it's just, I don't know how people have that kind of time to come up with that stuff, first of all. But, that's another conversation entirely. But yeah, most of my experience is Indian nationals as a whole, very financially conservative. I don't have it in front of me, but there was one of my, somebody I follow on Twitter yesterday that was talking about submitting the financials for, their adjustment of status, and they have over $1 million in liquid assets. It's pretty good. Not very many Americans can say that. That puts you in a very small percentage of the population, if that's the case.
Robert, like we have already mentioned a few times, the H1 being called cheap labor.
Mm-hmm.
From your experience, did any of your clients, any of them, ever have an H1B employee on a lower than prevailing wage?
So for me and folks that worked for me, that answer is never. Everything that we ran was 100% compliant. And that compliance came down to labor condition applications and those prevailing wages, and those wages for each site, right? So there'd be times where we'd have an H that would be working at multiple sites. Client had multiple sites, required different prevailing wages. We always paid above the highest of that prevailing wage, always, at least 20% for the most part. Sometimes it was thinner than that, but for the most part, it was about 20%. And then the other side to that was when we would run perm labor, okay, sometimes those would come back maybe right at the wage that we were working at. And so what you have to do is project, will we be paying that individual this when their priority date comes current, right? And so for the most part, what we would end up doing is increasing wages sort of periodically, an annual 3 to 5%. To make sure that we were above that perm labor prevailing wage too, because we didn't want any issues with that. But when it came down to the labor condition application and that prevailing wage, we always paid above it. Now, here's the disclaimer, okay? Third-party partners, when staffing firms work with third-party partners, unless it is required by the client to provide the actual pay rate to the consultant, for the most part, those numbers are not a given, okay? It's negotiated on a percentage or an hourly rate, whether that third party is paying that individual on an 80-20 or a 75-25 or even a flat salary, kind of out of sight, out of mind. And if we were ever audited, what would we request? We would request a copy of the H, right? Prove that that was the actual employer. We'd request a copy of a pay stub, but here's the key, Himanshu, financials redacted. I never needed to know how much somebody was paid. I just needed to know that they were paid. Mm-hmm. And so my disclaimer to you is that programs that I worked on, employers that I worked for, that answer is no, never. We were always well above, mainly 20%. But I can't answer that for my third-party partners. I would say for the most part that most of the guys that I worked with were well compensated. Most of my partners that I worked with, their consultants knew the pay rate. meaning from the staffing firm. And those were the guys that I preferred to work with because there was much more transparency across the board, right? The consultant knew what the pay rate was, they knew what the negotiated percentage was to them. And then, outside of that, we generally were well above, the prevailing wage determination.
Okay.
So I want to shift gears here. Your perspective, being an H1B medical professional, gives you a unique, insight into Senate Bill 3599, which, over the last couple of weeks I've discussed. That's the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act that was introduced in May of 2020. Interestingly enough, we've seen some language from that was included in the HEROES Act 2, House Bill 6800. But what I wanted to ask you is, you've been a big advocate of S3599. Do you believe that medical professionals, specifically Schedule A occupations, should be designated to work under H1B visa?
Robert, this is a very gray area, to be honest with you, because H1B technically is a specialty occupation, right? So we as medical professionals are specialty occupations.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, then yes, we qualify under the H1B category, but would there have been another category for us to work under? Yeah, I would support that we do not fall under the same category as H1Bs, but again, it's me who thinks about it that way.
Yeah.
Again, going back to square one, where is the problem really? The problem is how the green card process is set up. Like we discussed, H1B, yes or no, doesn't really matter at this point. It's as simple as that. That we need to set up the green card process in a way where a specialty occupation, which you said just a few minutes ago that you also agree with the Department of Labor and USCIS kind of shrinking the definition of specialty occupation. I also agree with that to some extent.
Yeah.
At the end, what is the goal? The goal is for the United States to be able to, let these people assimilate into the society as permanent residents,
right,
and citizens, right?
Yeah. The dual intent, right? I mean, that's
exactly. So if they are dual intent visas, then let the people who are interested and who are willing, let the people, gain their permanent resident status. Don't let them languish in this never ending wait, to be honest. Like I said, and like you also know, we have been shortage occupations for a very long time, and the pandemic has only made the demand go up. Supply continues to be limited. There's not enough physicians, which I think, it's a bigger topic to discuss on, where how the rural areas in America are going to suffer, which is happening. I mean, it's already happening. It's nothing new. It has happened in the past. It will continue to happen. And this whole pandemic has made this problem worse now. Now, you have already discussed what this bill 3599 proposes. It does make sense, right? That you provide 40,000 immigrant visas to the physicians, to the nurses. What disappoints me is that we were completely overlooked in this. To give our viewers, to give you an idea about how big of a role we have played in this, is anybody that contracts this infection suffers some severe level of lung damage. Now, who takes care of them through the whole recovery process? Who is the one spending 1 hour for a morning session, 1 hour for an evening session, every single day for about 2 to 3 months? It's the physical therapists that are doing that. And if anybody agrees with simple science that your risk of infection increases. It increases astronomically the more time you spend with a patient, with an infectious patient, and the more frequently you are
Mm-hmm.
around those patients. So I can tell you this: I have colleagues in my hospital that have contracted this infection. I have colleagues from Texas A&M who are PTs who have contracted this infection. Their
Mm-hmm.
families have contracted this infection. So it's like, why have we been overlooked in this pandemic when we have been on the same front lines as the physicians, as
Mm-hmm.
the nurses? And you know we have we have constantly, we cast all these fears aside. We put our own health, our family's health at risk to go to work to take care of these patients. But don't you think it is sad? It is very disheartening to be overlooked like this. In this bill that is about the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act.
Mm-hmm.
You should be very specific. That you just want the physicians to be given
Mm-hmm.
on immigrant visas. I mean, to be given immigrant visas.
Right.
It, it it's it's a good bill. It's a good effort, but it actually needs to appreciate what everybody is doing. Not just
Mm-hmm.
it shouldn't be about picking and choosing. We are not cherry picking here. You need to actually go there and recognize who all are, actually helping your patients out.
Yeah.
And honestly, what impression are we casting on any new highly skilled specialized physical therapist that wants to come here?
Mm-hmm.
We are not giving a very good impression to any of those people.
Yeah.
And like you already said that, you are seeing that, people from India that are already here, they are discouraging people from coming here.
Mm-hmm.
Just getting worse. And I'm one of those people who has actually told people straight up, do not come here, do not even think about it unless
Mm-hmm.
you really want to be here. And I mean, you want to be here as an indentured servant, by all
Yeah.
means do it. But if you want your freedoms, if you want a life where you're respected, go to another nation.
Mm-hmm.
Robert, to be honest with you, you know do you realize, or do you see our role in the fight against this pandemic? What I want your thoughts on who all should have been really included in this bill.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's interesting. You talk about front lines, but yet we forget about the rehabilitation component, right? And what goes along with that. And I guess I didn't really fully understand, that doesn't include, MTs, right? It just doesn't, or PTs, if you will, masters in physical therapy or masters in kinesiology that are practicing physical therapy. Um, but I think when I look at it, you look at what 25K, I believe, was for nurses and 15K for physicians, I think was the number.
Mhm.
Um, but then, that that's uncapped for the spouses and dependents, which is interesting legislation. Good to see that there actually is some bipartisan or at least partisan consent towards that, right? The dependent component, even if it's just in this, but it tells me that they may be open to more discussion around that in the future. I think there needs to be some sort of reform around it. And if we include physical therapists in that, I got to be honest with you, Himanshu, I can't imagine that those numbers are extremely large. I mean, I would think maybe if we're talking about across the entire country, H1Bs that are PTs or working in physical therapy or rehabilitation, I mean, I would guess that those numbers probably somewhere around 20, 25,000. I don't know. I'm totally pulling a number out of thin air, but I can't imagine that it's an extremely large percentage.
Let's put that down to about 1/6.
Yeah.
About 4,000 H1B physical therapists from
Yeah.
India.
So,
You know,
you talk again. I mean, that
4,000 is not a lot to be.
no. And I said 20 thinking that number wasn't a lot, right? But I guess, when you talk about, the medical numbers as a whole, I mean, it's a very small percentage of the H1B population. It just is. But, when you hear 4,000, okay, so you're talking about 4,000 all in different journeys, and different really sort of times in their H1B journey. Um, you have to look at folks like you, though, right? And I think that this is where my decision is made. I look at folks like you that are responsible for, like, I've said this to you a few times, and I've said it tonight, thousands of American lives you are responsible for. So, what value does that have to me? Significant. And it's significant because we're talking about not necessarily saving a life on the front end, we're talking about rehabilitating it on the back end and the programs that are involved in that. I personally went through a significant injury back in February of 2008, and I had to do 6 months of rehab. And it was intensive, and I would have never made it and being back to where I am if it weren't for my physical therapists and the team of physical therapists that I saw. And so, you look at this pandemic and who knows what some of the lasting impacts are on it, but you talk about lung rehabilitation and what that is, that's pretty intensive care. It just is. And so again, it goes back to, yeah, this thing is a, a lot larger than just nurses and physicians. It just is when we're talking about H1Bs in the med field. I mean, I have to start thinking about EMTs as another example. I mean, I don't know of any H1Bs that are EMTs, but you start thinking about H1Bs that are dentists. There are a lot of DDSs out there that are on H1. Would they be designated under that physician category? I doubt it. I don't think so. But I think when you start to look at that, then we have to look at all of it, right? All of the medical professionals that are working under an H1B designation. Physical therapy is a specialty occupation. Dentistry is a specialty occupation, right? It's just a matter of how you want to define it, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think reform around the H1B medical is necessary. I think a path to residency, or if they decide to go down that H1B EAD or the EAD COVID-19 that I've seen, I think that was included in the HEROES Act, the 6800. House Bill 6800. I think there was some discussion around an EAD COVID-19 status, creating a new status. So if it's not going to be Senate Bill 3599, I think we will see some form of legislation as it's vital for the medical professionals, Schedule A occupations that are working under H1B. And I've been saying this and again repeating it here that while I agree with you, H1s working in the medical profession are specialty occupation. I think the reason why I want to see it removed from outside of the H1B designation altogether is because of the negative connotations that the H1B bears for medical professionals. I think that if the status were H1M, I don't know, I'm just making something up to be honest with you, but if the status were H1M, what would that change? And I think it would change a lot. It would change a negative perception towards you, a negative perception towards your path or residency. I mean, you could look at amending or adjusting what that path would look like for an H1M. I mean, again, when we talk about reform, we have to kind of spitball these ideas, and maybe that's one of them, right? Maybe it's the H1M EAD. I don't know, but what I do know is that to me, they shouldn't all be designated. When you look at why the law was written the way it was, it's because of the logic you provided. Physical therapist is a specialty occupation. Dentistry is a specialty occupation. Gastroenterology is a specialty occupation. So it was easy to put it under that category. But our society and economy has evolved. Technology's evolved so much. And the way technology's evolved and the impact of the H1B around that evolution tells me that now's the time to look at some sort of reform around H1Bs that are medical professionals.
And to be honest with you, like we already discussed, being Schedule A occupations, there should be something that should be done. I mean, if I was to give you straight up statistics, over the next about 10 years, the demand for physical therapists is going to grow by about 28%. Again, if you look at the graphs provided by DOL itself, that percent is the highest in the United States. No other profession's demand is going to go up by 28%. But again, the supply is not there. So why again, if you have designated us into Schedule A occupation, why not provide an easier path for us to assimilate into the society? Why still consider us temporary workers? Right. And let us suffer in that backlog when we are in a shortage occupation. It's not like you don't need us. You need us. You realize that you need us. Yeah. And I'm not saying that it's just a one-way street. It's a two-way street. We love being here. We love this nation, which is why we came here. So if we are mutually beneficial to each other, why not make it easier for us to assimilate? Yeah. If I was taking another citizen's job or another permanent resident's job, yeah, shoot me. I don't want to do that. Right. I'll give you a little idea, where I work right now. When I was told that, we need to expand, we need to hire more people, take a guess how many H1Bs I might have hired. I hired 0. All I hired was American citizens, because the first thing I did was, when we put the ad out, I had a bunch of interviews lined up. And of course, American citizens, American citizens, American citizens. The one that made the most professional and financial sense to me came on board. And they are all American citizens.
Yeah. You hired the best candidate, no Absolutely. Matter the status.
Absolutely.
And I think, I would tell you there was, I've worked with some great people in my career, but there's one particular individual I worked with, and he never cared about work, status, authorization. He wanted to put the best candidate in front of his client. And I'll tell you, that individual was very successful because of that. It was always about the client, and in this case, you're the client. You're the hiring manager, right? You want to hire the best available talent. What would you talked about the physician or the physical therapist shortage, and you said 28%. Expected demand, right? Increase in demand for physical therapists. Yesterday I talked about there's a projected physician shortage of 139,000 by the year 2033 was the data, I believe. But what would the impact of a physical therapist shortage have, or a physician shortage? What would that have? What would that impact have?
Robert, it's just going to be, it's just going to be a disaster of epic proportions, to be honest. And like we are talking about all these professions, citizens, permanent residents, they don't really want to go work in those middle of nowhere places. Mm-hmm. Personally, myself, I worked in three places that were in the middle of nowhere. I mean, you cannot imagine.
You went where the job was.
I was where the job was. Exactly. So to think about that again, now you have the DOL wage rule. Like you said, who is going to pay a physician or a physical therapist or a nurse a 30% more salary in that rural area? So now you lost a healthcare worker from that area. That was vital to the operations there. That was vital to serving the population there. You just lost them because of your stupid rule, to be honest with you. And what's basically happening now is, because of all these new rules, new executive orders, and the backlog, we are actually seeing physicians, physical therapists, nurses move out from the US. Let's forget about those that do not want to come to the US because of this problem. We are seeing people move out of the US now. They're moving to Canada. I know people who have moved to England. I know people who have moved to Ireland. I know people who have moved to Australia. Just for this simple reason that they do not want to be stuck in this never-ending circus. And to be honest with you, again, if this whole term of, I won't say term, if this whole thing that is said that H1B workers displace Americans, it's something that's tossed out like candy on Halloween, to be honest with you. If that was true, even remotely true, why would we still get phone calls? We would still get emails almost on a daily basis for opportunities with big bonuses. I mean, how big of a disaster do we need to realize that the healthcare industry right now is it's inching towards an implosion, and it's not going to be good. It's going to be very ugly if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Scary. Since we talked about 3599, initially it was just for the nurses. It was, when it was introduced, the first version was only for the nurses because they were Schedule A occupation. That was the reasoning behind this 3599. But then, of course, the lobbying comes into play. You get MDs also added to it. But again, I'll grab it back to, we were just overlooked.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. The H1B for nurses, I think I'm going to say 1990 is when they designated them out completely under H1B designation. I could be wrong in that, but I want to say that's what it was. But that's interesting. I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised. I mean, physicians and the right amount of lobbyists talk to the right folks. It's amazing how amendments and provisions are created in that manner. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about Senate Bill S386 or Senate Bill 386. There's been a lot of discussion around 386, really a lot this year, specifically over the last, really, I'd say 90 days. But, I did a video, gosh, probably a month ago now. And, it's a question that I received a lot. And, will Senate Bill 386 pass? And my answer was no. I still feel that way. While I've been a proponent and a supporter of S386, I just feel like the theatrics that happened kind of lead me to that conclusion. But I wanted to ask you, let's just hypothetically say, Senate Bill 386 does die in the 2020 session. What would you like to see proposed in 2021?
Robert, the simplest answer to this question is whatever is introduced. Call it Senate Bill XYZ. I don't care, whatever the bill is. All it needs to do is really, just retain and attract skilled immigrants. All it really needs to do is, you prioritize skilled immigrants from all over the world. I could care if you could be from Mars, but if you are skilled and you will contribute to the economy, you are more than welcome here. That's right. The way it should be. I mean, I get it. Some people point out to other nations, the issues in other nations, but we don't have any less issues in the United States ourselves. We have enough of the issues. Um, One of the biggest pet peeves of mine has been, the amount of people that are on welfare, and this will I'll probably catch a good amount of heat for this, but a lot of those people that are on welfare are from some of the other countries, some of the other countries where they came from, because unfortunately, if you're from one of those countries, your skills are not looked at, your financial situation is not looked at, your job situation is not looked at, you are just let in. And being in my position personally, I have seen immigrants from those nations who are citizens, permanent residents, and they're on government welfare.
Yeah.
When I've been here, and even all this time when I've been here, none of us, I can guarantee none of us Indians, to be honest with you, that have come here on non-immigrant H1B or whatever visa you want to talk about, none of us have taken a dime from government towards anything for us. We have
Well,
been
you can't. You're
contributing.
not eligible for unemployment, unfortunately.
Exactly.
But I mean, and I guess I say unfortunately, but I guess that's just part of the arrangement, right? And that's one of the things I've talked about. But I think you're referring specifically to, and a lot of folks aren't aware of this, the diversity based visas and the refugee based visas that happen, and some of the family based preferences out there as well.
Robert, actually, it's not just. I am I am a big supporter of bringing people in if there is a humanitarian cause. I'll
Sure.
be very honest.
Yeah.
You are a human. Your first duty is to help another human being. That's what we do as people. But what I'm really talking about, because I've seen it firsthand, is I'm not going to name those countries out here, obviously. People from certain nations that I know of, they came here on student visas, and they come here on student visas, and within the first 2 years of their arrival here, they started working at meat factories. They started working as Uber drivers, and they're already citizens. They're permanent residents. Doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, the student visa is a big one. I mean, we could talk for hours on what that reform would need to look like, but unfortunately, the American universities, there's too much to lose. It's all about the money.
And I think that's where the current foreign enrollment is really going to hit these universities hard, because
Yep.
like we saw that graph today, right? The foreign enrollment is at an all-time low.
Yeah.
It's just going to get worse if you
Well,
don't.
and not only is it an all-time low, but the tuition that foreign students are charged is double what most American students are charged. So
Absolutely.
you're talking about an increase, loss in revenue for these universities.
And the whole point is, if you are not willing to recognize and take care of the non-immigrants that come here, contribute to your society, why even let them in at the first place? Simple.
Yeah. Oh, you're right.
Do you personally think that now the US is starting to experience a brain drain due to these policies, and that, and of course the government's reluctance to fix the broken system?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, you've got, again, we go back to the conversation we've had, folks like you telling people in your circle that are asking your advice, should I come or should I not, saying no, right? That's the beginning, but that's been happening. I think, ultimately, it really comes back to the 2016 presidential election and how that completely altered what legal immigration looks like now and what it's going to look like in the future. You're talking about a president that has utilized over 400 executive actions to mold immigration law. Now, that is Congress's job, but yet this president has done it. Whether you like that or not, there are some that love that. And then there are others that think that's just not how it should work. That's not how the three levels of government work. And so the brain drain is not only happening by folks not coming, but it's also happening for folks that are here that are looking at what their other options are. And so the tipping point is what we need to be afraid of. And what I mean by that is that if we're going to get to a point to where immigration numbers for high-skilled immigrants are going to be at an all-time low. Incoming international student numbers are going to be at an all-time low. But does that mean that unemployment for Americans is going to be at an all-time high? No. And we are going to continue to lose some of the best and brightest that are already here because they're going to seek other options because they don't feel like they're being treated on equal ground. And so the worst thing that can happen is that we can continue to restrict legal high-skilled immigration here into the U.S. Because if we do, companies will look elsewhere. They will outsource. They will nearshore. They will send those jobs wherever they can get the best rate with the highest skill. Whether that's Canada, Mexico, Costa Rica, Philippines, India, Finland, it doesn't matter. What matters is price and quality. And so if we restrict those that bring the quality into this country, we're going to lose, and we're going to lose in the human capital war. We're going to lose to Canada. We're going to lose to Mexico. We're going to lose to the UK. We're going to lose to China. We're going to lose to Australia. We're going to lose to India. We're going to lose to the Philippines. I don't want this country to lose. I love the United States, okay? The freedom that we have here, the freedom that I have to do this, to talk about immigration, to meet people like you, the technology that backs this, it's amazing. It really is, right? And a lot of it was built on the back of immigrants. And so the brain drain is a serious problem. But it's not just the brain drain coming here, right? It's the brain drain of folks like you that are fed up, that are thinking about what are my other options. I told the story of my really good friend and one of the best software architects I've ever met in my entire staffing career. He decided to move to Australia. Why? He was sick of it. He was on his fourth I-140. Fourth.
Oh, my God.
And he decided that while I am still young, before I am on the wrong side of 35, I need to make this move. And you know, I've told that story. I don't know if you've watched that video or not, but that story is not unique because you could probably tell me of 3 or 4 friends that have gone to Canada or Australia or the UK as well. I mean, everybody knows somebody.
Absolutely.
So, you know, you and I have interacted a good bit on Twitter recently. I think we found each other through Dr. Raj. I'm pretty sure I think how we got connected. I think I'd commented on one of his posts and you and I found each other. And you've been one of my bigger advocates really over the last few weeks. So I just wanted to say thank you for that, first of all. But I wanted to ask you, you know, what attracted you to the H1B Guy platform?
Well, you know, there's not a lot of people that know about this whole green card backlog problem. There's a few that know about it. And fortunately, you know, you understand our challenges, our uncertainties. And the thing is, you know, you have been involved in hiring these H1B professionals for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And yet you are the one who supports immigration reform in their favor. it speaks a lot about you as a person. And you being that person, that's my sole reason to be a supporter of your platform.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That means a lot. And I've told this story before when I conceptualized the idea for the H1B Guy platform. I wrote down a bunch of ideas. I really didn't know where it was going to go. But what I do know is that the growth that I've seen over the last, couple of months, the folks and the messages that I get tell me that I'm definitely doing something right. I will admit today, though, that I got challenged on doing more than just being a voice. And, I'm going to think about that because I feel like I've done some things. I've done some media interviews over the last couple of weeks, nothing that's been published yet, whether it will or not, who knows. I've met with a couple of advocacy groups over the last couple of weeks, and we're just starting to begin those conversations. But I want to use this platform to do more than just be a voice. And I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'd be open to any suggestions from you or anyone out there on YouTube. What more can I do, right? But what I will tell you that I am going to continue to do is I'm going to continue to talk about our system and how it needs to be reformed. And I'm going to continue to try to bridge the gap between employers and immigration attorneys. Because I think that, ultimately what you said is that's something that I do and the knowledge that I have that's very unique. And so I just hope if I continue to talk about it, maybe I can have some other folks out there think about things in a different way, or if not, maybe just help educate them and change their mind or opinion on the H-1B visa and what it really is. And again, it's not just about the H-1B visa. It's about the best and brightest, whatever form that looks like. So speaking of, mentioned my love for this country, and I've sensed your love for the U.S., through our conversations and even here tonight, it definitely is clearly evident. But why have you decided to spend your prime earning years here in the U.S.?
It's I don't know how to answer this to be honest, but when I came here, my goal was to build a career for myself, provide a better life to my family, and of course assimilate in the American society. And through all these years, I have been lucky enough to have befriended a few people, some through work, some through my school, and some of those people have become more of a family to us, through all these years. And they have definitely provided us with a lot of emotional support through these trying times. Funny thing is that some of my American friends actually say that I'm more patriotic towards the USA than a lot of Americans they know.
Yeah.
That's something I'm proud of, but at the same time, it makes me sad. I have given the prime years of my life to a nation I call home, but that nation unfortunately doesn't consider me as its own. That's the sad part of it. That's
Right.
the only thing that makes me sad about being so patriotic towards this nation. Giving so much love and so much time of our lives to this nation. I just want
And I
to
think,
ask what would you suggest to professionals like us that are stuck in this limbo?
yeah, I mean, I think you talked about an example earlier, with the I-140 determination and the challenges that it created for you, and yet a choice, fight or flight, right? And I think, my advice here is that the choice is simple, stay and fight, or consider what your options are and go now. because I don't think things are going to change for the better anytime soon. And by better, I mean a complete, clearing of the green card backlog. I don't foresee that. I could be wrong, but I think if you stay and fight, you have to rally in numbers. You're most powerful in numbers, whether that be social media or some form of advocacy group, like I've talked about already. Um, what you're not going to get done is social media warfare on U.S. senators. That's not going to get things done. Does it make them take notice? Yes. But it unfortunately, most U.S. senators and most House of Representatives, um, their knowledge on immigration is minimal at best. And so you have a select few who know a lot about it and are working to reform it. But as a whole, I think it's a minority of our elected officials that truly understand how the immigration system works here, specifically employment-based immigration. And so my advice to you is that folks like you who are well educated, well spoken, and passionate about this country need to continue to speak up. And you need to continue to advocate for yourself, because if you're not going to do it, no one else is going to do it for you. But you also need to do that with folks that are like-minded, that have similar stories. Now, numbers are powerful, but money money is even more powerful, right? And so, then you get into what that looks like, what that means. And so it's really about finding sort of the right group that you want to associate yourself with. But I look at someone like you who has worked your way up to a certain level, and where you stand and what your role is and what your responsibilities are and the impact that you make. You can continue to do what you do into the foreseeable future. But if you were to look to go somewhere else, would you be given that same leisure? I don't know, right? I don't know if you would be able to move to Canada and immediately step into a director level role where you had a pretty significant amount of responsibility. Very well may be able to do that. But you said this earlier, and this is where I always come back to folks that have waited and waited and waited, talking, the October bulletin and waiting, right? Do I downgrade? Do I wait? What do I do? Texas is home to you. If you were to uproot your life right now, sell your assets, and make a change completely outside of this country, how long would it take for where you're going to be home? My guess, based on my friend that's in Australia, it's about 2 to 3 years. And so is the 2 to 3 years that you would either go somewhere else and do that, or 2 to 3 years that you stay here and ride this thing out? I mean, I think that's kind of where you are. That's the limbo, and that's the decision that's difficult. Do you continue to accumulate wealth and acquire assets because of the position that you're in here? Or do you start to consider other options, go through those processes, see if you can get a better opportunity outside of the U.S.? It very well may. I mean, the global migration is happening. But it comes back to, if you love where you are, you love what you do, you love the life you have, but yet everything else, meaning you're treated as a second-class citizen, has to change. It's a matter of how long you're willing to fight for that. And I think that is the most difficult decision you have to make for yourself and others that may be watching this or that are in the same boat. That's the most difficult decision, because it's easy for me here on this side. I was born in this country, raised here, will live my entire adult life here, most likely, right? But I don't have the driver's license issues that you do. I don't have the freedom of travel issues that you do. I don't have the restrictions on who I can work for and how much I'm paid and where I have to work. I don't have that. It's much easier for me to say, oh, stay here, ride it out, see where it goes. I say that because the fear of losing folks like you is one of the things that is motivating me to continue to talk about outsourcing and merit-based systems and why the H1B needs reform. It just is.
Unfortunately, this whole outsourcing situation, we already talked about this, like you said, the companies will go where they have a better rate and they find better skill. So,
Yep.
that's the reason so many of these companies are actually moving their employees, or let's put it this way, hiring employees from other nations.
Mm-hmm.
They're cheaper, probably better skilled, then it's just a matter of time, to be honest with you, before this whole this whole this whole situation implodes, and we, as this whole nation gets caught on the back foot. Because if all this innovation, all the healthcare people move out of this nation, what are we going to be left with? This again is something that doesn't sound very good, but the way the current society is in the US, that people are given out participation trophies. Nobody wants to be competent. You go out here and you do not see parents actually pushing their kids to go to school, to go to college, to get an actual good degree that will take them places. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I've seen people go to college and get a master's in liberal arts. Come on now, what's where are you going with it? Where
Yeah.
are you going with it?
You got a 40,000 degree and you can't get a $40,000 job.
Exactly. And then they want to complain about immigrant workers coming in and taking your jobs. I mean, you cannot work as an MD, you cannot operate on people with a liberal arts degree. Simple as that.
Yeah.
So when you have those competent people coming in and then you restrict them, they're going to leave. What are you going to be left with? Unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately, we've seen no conversation around immigration in the presidential first debate or the vice presidential debate. But what we've seen leading into the last month of the election from the current administration is H1Bs as political pawns, and it's very scary what the future has in store. But um, hopefully, the hope is that we'll continue to talk about this. We'll see reform for the better. We'll see new laws that benefit everyone for the better, and we won't see that brain drain, right? I mean, I think that's what it comes down to. So, um, wanted to see if you had any closing remarks, anything that you wanted to wrap up with here tonight.
To be honest, no. Actually, I've talked a lot. I've pretty much covered everything, everything that was on my mind, and I know most of it was more like a big rant from my side. But this is the brutal truth. The
Yeah.
the reality, the realm that we are sitting in right now.
Well, I love a good rant too. As you can tell, I can go on and on and on. I think this is the longest live session that I've done. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time. One of I don't know if you can you see that if it comes up on your screen there. Ramakrishna has been a good follower. He's on Twitter and YouTube, just a good dude, and dropped us a nice comment. So really appreciate that, Ramakrishna. And thank you for joining us tonight. Um, but Himanshu, I just wanted to say thank you very much for your time, putting your face and your name out there to talk about your immigration journey, your H-1B immigrant life here in the U.S., what you do on a daily basis. We covered S3599, we covered S386, we covered the interim final rule. We talked at length about medical professionals. We really just hit on a lot. So I wanted to let anyone know, if you've made it this far, you can follow Himanshu on Twitter. He's at dark_night 1587. Go ahead and give him a follow. And if you haven't had a chance, I'd like to ask you, check out the H1BGuy.com for more opinions and advice on employment-based preferences. If you haven't already, like this video, subscribe to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube. And anyone who is still watching, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking time to join us here tonight, watching my content, and really just appreciate your support. Himanshu, I want to say thank you to you.
It's because of people like you that we still have hope. That there are people out there that understand this whole situation, and I can't put it in words how much myself and colleagues of mine thank you for everything that you're doing, that you're being one of the most vocal supporters for immigration reform, and it's just keeping our hopes alive.
Well, thank you. I can't do it without you and your support. I've never felt more fulfilled in what I do on a daily basis than I do now. And it's because I'm helping people, but I'm helping people do something that I love, right? Which is to run my mouth and to talk about immigration. And so, thank you so much. I just really appreciate your kind words, your comments, and joining me tonight. Just really appreciate it. But we'll close it up here tonight. And Himanshu, I'm going to wish you a great evening. Maybe we'll have you back on some other time. I'm working on doing like a panel thing at some point in the future. I would hope maybe we can talk about that at a later time and date. But again, thank you so much. We'll wrap it up here tonight. This has been the H1B Guy with special guest Himanshu, again at dark_night 1587 on Twitter. The H1B Guy, your global source for all things H1B.